All right, let's get right into it. We're going to be talking about the incredibly messy and frankly bloody dynasty of one of history's most notorious kings, Herod the Great. Now, you might have heard of him because of his massive building projects, but his real story, well, it isn't in stone and mortar. It's a dark family drama, a saga built on strategic marriages, ruthless ambition, and a whole lot of murder.
And that really brings us to the question that's at the absolute heart of this whole thing. Why would a king kill his own children? I mean, seriously. If we can get our heads around the kind of paranoia that drives a father to see his own sons as enemies, then we can really start to understand the fractured, dangerous world of the New Testament.
So, the first thing you have to understand about a guy like Herod is that marriage was never, ever about love. Not even a little bit. For him, it was a cold, calculated move on a giant political chessboard.
Yeah, every single wife was a pawn, a piece used to lock down power, maybe forge an alliance, or, and this is the big one, to produce an heir. But here's the catch, right? The more heirs you have, the more rivals you create for yourself.
And you can see this deadly pattern right from the very beginning. Take his first wife Doris and their son Antipater. For years, Antipater was the heir apparent. But as this quote suggests, that was probably the most dangerous job in the entire kingdom. And sure enough, in 4 BC, just days before Herod himself died, Antipater was executed.
Now, this brutal cycle gets completely supercharged with Herod's biggest strategic move. It was a total game changer, but it also became the source of his greatest fear, marrying into the Hasmonean dynasty. This was his ultimate play for legitimacy, but that prize came with a serious poison pill.
So who were the Hasmoneans? You got to think of them as the true blue blood royalty of Judea. They weren't just kings, they were also the high priests. They had the legitimacy, the popular support, everything that Herod, as an outsider, desperately craved. So his grand idea was to marry the Hasmonean princess Mariamne and basically staple her family's credibility onto his own rule.
And this is what created the central, fatal paradox of his entire reign. His sons with Mariamne, Alexander and Aristobulus, were perfect heirs on paper. They had his power, sure, but they also had their mother's beloved Hasmonean blood. And in Herod's paranoid mind, their popularity was a direct threat. They were walking reminders that a more legitimate dynasty could just replace him.
So this story starts out like some kind of political fairy tale, right? Heirs are born, uniting two powerful family lines, but then the paranoia just creeps in. Whispers, rumors. For Herod, that was enough to convince him his sons were plotting against him. And so, in 7 BC, he does the unthinkable. He has both of them executed, destroying his own direct link to Jewish royalty.
So with his star heirs dead, Herod creates this huge power vacuum right in the middle of his kingdom. So who's left? Well, this is where the sons of Herod's other, let's just say less prestigious wives are suddenly shoved into the spotlight. And believe it or not, these are the Herods you actually read about in the New Testament.
Just look at the pattern here. The sons of his most strategic wives, Doris the Eudemian and Mariamne the Hasmonean, every single one of them was executed. The ones who survived to inherit the kingdom were the sons of Malthus, a Samaritan, and Cleopatra of Jerusalem. These weren't the heirs Herod spent decades grooming. They were just the ones left standing after he was done killing everybody else.
And the quality of these remaining sons was, must just say it was questionable. Take Herod Archelaus, who got the main prize of Judea. He was so brutal that the Gospel of Matthew specifically calls him out. It says Joseph was literally warned in a dream to stay away from his territory, which is why the Holy Family heads to Galilee instead. Imagine being so terrifying you get a warning label in the Bible.
Okay, so now let's talk about his brother, Herod Antipas, who got Galilee. Now this is the Herod you're probably most familiar with. He's the one who shows up in the stories of both John the Baptist and Jesus, and his entire reign is pretty much defined by a massive family scandal.
And this brings us to maybe the most tangled, and frankly most consequential part of this whole family saga. Because the drama between Herod's kids wasn't just some ancient reality TV show. No, this had lethal, world-changing consequences.
Okay, first, a quick public service announcement, because this gets confusing. There are two important half-brothers, and they're both named Philip. First, you've got Herod Philip. He's a private citizen, and he was the first husband of the infamous Herodias. Then you have Philip the Tetrarch. He was an actual ruler, mentioned in Luke's Gospel, and, by all accounts, a pretty decent leader. Two Philips, very different guys. Got it? Good.
So, here's how that scandal killed a prophet.
Herodias, who, by the way, is the granddaughter of Herod the Great, leaves her husband, the private citizen Philip, for his much more powerful half-brother, Herod Antipas. John the Baptist publicly calls them out on it, and Herodias, so furious at this public shaming, masterminds the whole plot that leads to John's execution. A messy family affair leads directly to the death of a major prophet.
So, after all the strategic marriages, the paranoia, and the bloodshed, what was the end result? What kind of kingdom did Herod actually leave behind?
Well, we can't forget about all the others. Herod had at least 10 wives. The sons he had with wives like Pallas, Phaedra, and Elpis, they never even got a sniff of power. They just faded from history. And that's the crucial point. In Herod's court, who your mother was and whether you could survive all the backstabbing mattered way more than just being the firstborn.
And here is the ultimate irony of this whole story, the main takeaway. In his desperate, paranoid quest to secure his dynasty, Herod achieved the exact opposite. He murdered his best and most legitimate heirs and left behind a weak, fractured kingdom for his less capable sons to fight over.
He personally created the unstable, divided political landscape of the New Testament. The world that Jesus was born into was fundamentally shaped by this one man's fear. The next time you read the Gospels and see the name Herod, remember, you're not just reading about one guy. You're reading the echo of a dynasty built on a toxic foundation of fear and bloodshed.
And that leaves us with a really fascinating what-if to think about, doesn't it? What if Herod had trusted his sons instead of fearing them? What if he had actually built a strong, unified kingdom with those Hasmonean heirs? You have to wonder, how different would the stage of history have been for the incredible events that were about to unfold? It really makes you think.